Thank you for joining the Dr. Mollie James Show. My guest today is Dr. James Thorp. He is a board-certified OBGYN doctor and maternal fetal medicine specialist who has been on the forefront of battling wrong information during COVID and protecting his patients from an unethical and corrupt system. Join us as we cover today how this all unfolded, the history of corrupting the relationship between OBGYN doctors and their patients, and why women are targeted. We'll also get into the extent of corruption and how much money was spent in the propaganda campaign to try to get you to take a COVID shot. Coming up next, Dr. James Thorp. Today, I'm honored to welcome our guest, Dr. James Thorp. He has been an absolute warrior in the COVID front. He is board-certified OBGYN, maternal fetal medicine, and early on saw the dangers that COVID was causing his patients. So, Dr. Thorp, welcome to the show.
Dr. James, thank you so much for having me on your show, and I've been looking forward to this for a long time.
You and your wife have just done some amazing work. Obviously, you and I met through the COVID shots and the resistance that we were starting to raise some alarm bells. But even your wife joined the fight and helped uncover some data. So we're going to get to that. But tell people a little bit about your journey and how you got into being an activist for this.
Yeah, well, I was a knucklehead, for most of my career. I was a very, very busy clinician. I graduated from medical school in 1979, so I will have been in practice for 45 years this June, Molly,
Wonderful.
and it's been a wonderful ride. I've always focused on high risk obstetrics. It's always been my passion. Um, I guess it goes way back. Just my mother was a labor and delivery nurse. Her name was Mollie,
Oh.
and early in my as a adolescent, I read the book by Morton Thompson, "The Cry and the Covenant," about Dr. Ignaz Semmelweis, and I know that you know of him. And so he had a profound influence on my life. But, really, I've been focused. I always wanted to stay away from the fast tracked university system. But on the other hand, I stayed in a clinical setting that was always affiliated um, with residents and students. And I've always published extensively. It's one of my passions. Next to seeing patients, it's doing clinical studies, asking simple questions to benefit my patients. One of the things that Ignaz, Dr. Ignaz Semmelweis taught me as a mentor, so to speak, what I learned from him from reading all of the history of his life. So, I mea culpa, mea culpa. I drank the Kool-Aid. I believed everything that I was taught in medical school. I pushed vaccines. I was a vaccine pusher, really all the way up until after the turn of the century. I've always been honored by my my professional organizations. Gosh, the Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine, I was honored to be on their international board of directors for the whole country. And of course, that's international for 3 years at the turn of the century. And before that, I had been a board examiner for the American Board of Obstetrics and Gynecology. And I've done countless, research and teaching awards at the American College of OBGYN. So, it was, I just bought everything that they said. I believed everything they said. And here's the worst part. I even pushed vaccines in pregnancy up until probably 15 years ago, 10 years ago. But at the turn of the century, I think at the same time when the former editor of the New England Journal of Medicine. Her name was Dr. Marshall Angel. You may remember her. And, in the late 90s and turn of the century, she had a decade or so on me. But when I read her expose on, the New England Journal of Medicine and how corrupt they were, and then I got into the pharmaceutical industry and looked at some of their stuff. Then I really looked at the vaccines in pregnancy and realized this is really a narrative without any there are no data whatsoever in follow-up. This is a narrative. It sounds beautiful, but it's a narrative that's made up. So then when COVID hit, as you know, in late 2019 and 2020, being in my profession, I had been using hydroxychloroquine for 45 years. It was a mainstay because it was used in women of reproductive age who had a much higher risk of autoimmune disease. By the way, probably a vaccine complication. So they were placed on hydroxychloroquine by their family practice doctors, by their surgeons, like you, by internal medicine doctors, by rheumatologists, by OBGYN doctors, and they would get pregnant and we wouldn't take them off because it was such a effective um, anti-inflammatory drug for autoimmune disease. So we left them on in the first trimester, in the second, third breastfeeding. And by the way, it was endorsed and pushed by none other than the CDC and FDA. And in fact, I have slides of this, I've captured it. They've subsequently deleted their pushing of hydroxychloroquine in pregnant women, in breastfeeding women, in
Mhm.
children, and bragging about how safe it was in those high risk populations. With you maybe remember it with a big picture with a large mosquito on it, and it was kind of a greenish, pretty picture, pretty ad.
Mhm.
Well, they took that off their site in 2018 or 2019. They deleted that. But fortunately, I'm married to a sleuth, and she got that picture for me, and now I have it archived. But so when I started treating my patients with hydroxychloroquine, I became villainized and attacked, and then I knew it was game over.
So, was that really during 2020 when COVID hit that you became villainized for using hydroxychloroquine, or was it even before that?
No, I was using hydroxychloroquine for 45 years in pregnant women.
Uh-huh.
And I knew that it was safe and effective because all of the pregnant patients, so many pregnant patients had been on it.
Uh-huh.
So I had experience with it. And I also knew from that 2003, 2004 NIAID sponsored study how effective it was in SARS-CoV-1. So there were so many different alternate therapies for COVID-19 and SARS-CoV-2, but I knew that hydroxychloroquine was extraordinarily effective. And by the way, so did many other people in the White House. Um, I'm reading another book called Unmasked right now, and Dr. Stephen Hatfill, he'd be a great guest for your show. He's a close friend of mine,
Uh-huh.
and we're on the Kim probably talked about him because Kim and I are in the research group, one of the founding members with him, the Advanced Biological Research Group. But he was the he was the chief scientific advisor for Peter Navarro in the White House during the pandemic, and they had stockpiled 62 million doses. And then they were just stabbed in the back by all the Faucis and underlings that convinced. And by the way, President Trump was treated very successfully with hydroxychloroquine. So, but the whole narrative of pushing the vaccine just overcame that, and that got scuttled. And had they put those 62 million doses of hydroxychloroquine out, pandemic would have been over in August.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So, when did it become a problem for you prescribing it? Was it after COVID hit? And then what really made you start speaking out about what was going on, because you became on fire an advocate for your patients and for patients who were subjected to this.
Well, I got really suspicious, and I got attacked for prescribing it by the local pharmacies and got into some trouble where I was employed, really around you. Aren't you in St. Louis?
Hmm.
Yeah, and my former employee, SSM Health, right, who
Hmm.
subsequently fired me. But it was taboo. You didn't talk about this, and it's like, I'm not, I'm not going to be using vaccines. I was very concerned about in the summer of 2020. I'm a nerd. I have my own. I have a lifetime prescription for a sophisticated uh, uh, statistical software package. Always done all my own statistics, and I've planned and carried out and funded not by pharmaceutical companies or not by the government, but my own randomized controlled prospective trials in the 90s in pregnancy. So I knew how to plan and randomize studies and how to adequately study drugs. So I mocked up okay, what would it take for you, Jim, to feel comfortable prescribing this vaccine that they're working on? What would it take for me? What would be an adequate study? And I came up with a study which was a randomized, double blinded, placebo controlled trial that I worked out in detail, spent hours on it, obviously. And then the study would have required 35,000 patients in the placebo group, 35,000 in the treatment group, and it would have gone on for 10 years. It would have been a 10-year study, Molly. Now, there would have been an interim independent group that would have looked at the data independent of the researchers and the patients every year. And if there was a significant benefit or a significant risk, it would have been immediately terminated and published. That was my study. And I wasn't the only one that did that. Hatfield did that too, and probably many others. And I sent that to the president. I sent that to Fauci. I sent that to Gates. It was received with nothing but disdain. And so then by the middle of 2020, I was convinced that they were going to target women. And the reason why I knew they were going to target women was obvious because they targeted women throughout my whole career through OBGYN doctors. Why? Well, it's well known women make all the healthcare decisions in the world. So when a hospital wanted to increase their business, it didn't matter whether it was in surgery or whether it was in pediatrics. They would come to me. Okay, we got to capture these women when they're pregnant. We got to get them really juiced up about our system and treat them like gold. And then every other product line in the hospital and department will flourish if we can convince our women that we're the best.
Hmm.
That's exactly what they did on a national level, and they employed the highest level of PR firms, including Jay Winston at the Harvard School of Epidemiology and Marketing, to employ these techniques. So they did incredible research, but it wasn't on the vaccine. It was about marketing the drug and getting the women who were pregnant captured and targeted and convinced that it was safe, effective, and necessary in women.
Yeah. Now, SSM Health, I actually worked at as well. They were the one health system that didn't fire me during COVID because I didn't work there anymore. But you and I both saw and talked to women who were told if you're pregnant, you have to get the COVID shot if you want to deliver at this hospital. You have to get it. If you want to be my patient, you have to get it. Talk to us about the ethics of that.
The It's beyond unethical. It is, and this goes back now. I've learned so much. This goes back hundreds of years with vaccines. This has been an ideology. This has been a cult uh, based upon really no science based upon myth. Just unbelievable. But, you know, when you look at, I can understand, the Peter McCulloughs and the Mollie James and the Pierre Corys who aren't OBGYN docs. I can understand them and their organizations, just coming down on them and giving these mandates. But wait a minute, my organizations of pregnant women, American College of OBGYN, American Board of OBGYN, Society of Maternal Fetal Medicine, 60,000 OBGYNs in the country. No, there's no way they're going to ever convince us because we've lived through, we've seen thalidomide in our lifetimes, in our careers. We've seen diethylstilbestrol. These were horrible, horrible blights on human reproduction, and they're in our lifetime. There's no way that they are going to convince 60,000 OBGYN doctors, but they did it very easily by threatening them.
Yeah. I remember that one of the hospitals I worked with had an OBGYN that was pregnant that did a video of why she got the shot. And these people who got it were glorified at the hospital level. They were put on posters and they were given buttons and celebrated. Now, unfortunately, I think they're suffering some health consequences from that.
Yeah, it's a really unfortunate thing because you're exactly right. When, say, um, young Miss Smith, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, 25 years old, 30 years old, pregnant for the first time, in 2021, they go in to see their doctor and they are speaking. This is one of the most probably, I don't want to exaggerate this, but I think we describe this well in our publications and it's in others how a physician's OBGYN's relationship with her patient and patient's husband is probably the most sacred and sensitive relationship of all physicians. And this is why, because this patient has complete trust and adoration of their OBGYN doctor. They trust their doctor more than anybody. But what happened? Well, they weren't talking to Dr. Miller. Dr. Miller was threatened by her employer, and more importantly, threatened by the three institutions I talked about, and told essentially in a September 27, 2021 um, letter sent to 60,000 OBGYN doctors, you will follow the dictates of HHS and ACOG. And if you don't, this came from the American Board of OBGYN that has the power to destroy you and take away your license and take away your state license and take away your board certifications that you worked for all your life. You can't practice in a hospital without being board certified, let alone. And then they also got the Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine involved, the American College of OBGYN involved in that same letter, and worse, the Federation of State Medical Boards. They're all corrupt. And they said, we will take away your license, we will destroy your career unless you push this in pregnant women. So they didn't have the courage, they didn't have the ethical integrity to say, no, this is wrong. And by the way, they were purposefully kept too busy. You got to see patients every 15 minutes or, you're going to, take a pay cut, all this kind of nonsense. They captured physicians as slaves and then they told them what to do. And this is why the patient, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, with their new 12, 8-week pregnancy, first time visit. I mean, this is the most intimate physician patient relationship, everything, sex life, you know, theology, religion, a new life created in a womb. Oh, I trust my doctor. I love this has been documented in so many books. The relationship that's developed between it almost rivals that in many ways of a spouse. And those aren't my words; those are right out of other people's writings. So they had to capture women for two reasons. Number one, I mentioned the marketing reason, but number two, they had to convince women that the drug was in their best interest, and if they didn't take it, their life and their baby's life would be in jeopardy. And that's exactly what they did. So when you look at the early trials, Molly, they were predominantly women. And by the way, they were predominantly in the V-Safe system. They were women in healthcare workers. Okay. And so it was an absolute travesty. And then you have the collusion, the horrible, murderous, genocidal collusion that took part by the New England Journal of Medicine, the two editors. The editor in chief is Eric and Rubin, and the managing editor, Stephen Morrissey, colluded with HHS CDC then director, Rochelle Walensky, and her, you know, he's got a military appointment, Tom Shimabukuro, that's been pushing the vaccines in the CISA and the Vaccine Safety Committee in the FDA for 10 years. They got together with them, and on April 21st, 2021, the online edition of the New England Journal of Medicine had two articles in it. One was between Rochelle Walensky and the editors, and that was more of an op ed recording. And basically, what they said was it's safe in pregnancy, and pregnant women that won't take it, they're at risk of dying from COVID, and their babies are at risk for being damaged. And then the separate article was the famous Tom Shimabukuro and the 20 other co authors that they never wrote that article. It was a ghostwritten article by Pfizer, and I tore into it from the very beginning because they advertised a miscarriage rate of 12.6%. And I was the first one to pick up on this. And I talked to a lot of smart people that it was right over their head, including many really excellent researchers that said, well, what's wrong with the study?
Mhm.
Well, it's really clear what's wrong with the study. They took 700 patients. And they can't ever get out of it. They took 700 patients that actually got the vaccine in the third trimester. When they were out of the window for a miscarriage,
Mm.
Molly, a miscarriage can't occur. The window for a miscarriage is 20 weeks, 19 weeks and 6 days. And the vast majority of those occur, before 13 weeks. So when they take the miscarriage rate for those women that got the shot in before 20 weeks, it was 82%. But they took those 700 patients, they put them in the denominator and diluted it to 12.6%. This is what they did. This is sixth grade mathematics, and
Mhm.
I exposed it. And but of course, because people pay homage, this is the most elite medical journal in the world. No, they're scumbags. They've been doing this for decades. So when I pointed that out, it was very slow to get traction. It's finally got some traction. I published it in multiple different peer-reviewed articles, but
Mhm.
they there was collusion there. There was a conspiracy. Rochelle Walensky paid money. The HHS paid money to the New England Journal of Medicine to push their narrative. And that's what they did with all of the NGOs. And my research team, including my wife, Maggie Thorp, has proven this, and we've published this, and we've showed the money flow in our article that we published last year. The money flow went from HHS to the Massachusetts Department of Health, and then it was funneled from the Massachusetts Department of Health to the Massachusetts Medical Society. The Massachusetts Medical Society owns the New England Journal of Medicine.
Uh-huh.
So they were nothing more than, you go back to my example of Mr. and Mrs. Smith going in to see their OBGYN doctor that wasn't really the OBGYN doctor. She was forced to parrot the government narrative. And then you have the same thing happen with the NGO of the New England Journal of Medicine. They're bribed with massive amounts of money, get massive amounts of pharmaceutical advertising, as you can see. The FDA and the CDC are funded over 50% of their budget is from vaccine profits and patents, royalties. So every single fiber of the tapestry of our society were given money. No, were they in on the real reason a few of the global elites, to destroy humanity? No, they didn't know it on that level. No, they weren't colluding on that level. They didn't know it. They just bought in, and they were nothing more than whores and prostitutes. They just cared about the money. By the way, including Pfizer and Moderna, they were nothing more than paid whores. All they cared about was the money. This was a DoD product, as you know.
So I'm going to stop and rewind just a minute because you said we took this data. It was a 12% miscarriage rate after they fudged it. After they fudged it.
Right.
That's still massive, isn't it?
A 12.6 miscarriage rate is still threefold higher than it should be. When a young, healthy, pregnant woman and her husband go to their booking visit, what we used to call the booking visit, the first visit, they have an ultrasound, baby's heart rate's 160 and beautiful. The miscarriage rate's about 2 or 3%.
Okay.
Just ask Kimberly Biss.
Yeah, we did. She's been on and she's shown the data that it went from 4 to 12 to 15%. And that's kind of my point is showing a 12% miscarriage rate is nothing to brag about. So even after they fudged it, it still looks terrible.
And you know what looks even more terrible is that every single one of those 21 authors worked for the FDA and the CDC and HHS and the government. They were all government employees,
Mhm,
and they never declared that. That's you have to declare that. And by the way, this is the other thing that we pointed out. My research team pointed out in many of our publications
mhm.
um, is that my again Maggie. Man, I'm glad I'm married to her, and I'll never have to be on the other side of the courtroom with facing her. But she digs up the New England Journal of Medicine ethical statement. Well, it's clearly delineated that all authors are obligated to declare a financial any type of a conflict of interest.
Mhm,
So the authors themselves, Shima Bakuro and Rochelle Walensky authored that op-ed with the two editors. So the two editors of the New England Journal of Medicine and Rochelle Walensky, they violated the New England Journal of Medicine ethical standards, and we showed that. And not only did they, but then the second article with the 21 authors on that really launched the whole world of pregnant women to get the vaccine. Can you imagine that? They didn't declare their massive financial interest. Any journal in real life, Tom Shimabukuro, who was involved with the Vaccine Safety Committee of the FDA to be first author? No journal, no peer review legitimate journal would ever have accepted that
mhm.
at face value with that alone.
Yeah. And as people, and I'm sure you fall into this too, you want to follow evidence based medicine. But when people ask me that now, I just like colleagues, I just laugh because what evidence are you talking about? Are you talking about the completely corrupted medical journals who've been lying for years, who lost the deaths after people were given Pfizer shots? they had a cardiac arrest at home and just were dropped from the study. We didn't care that they had a cardiac arrest 3 days after a shot. Are you talking about that data? Or are you talking about what I see before my very eyes and what my peers that I trust tell me they're seeing in their practices? So, what kind of dollars are we talking about were funneled?
Well,
Give us a spectrum.
I mean, when you look at there are so many different agencies that were giving out money, but let's talk about an overall. You're talking about probably $5 to $6 trillion that was used in the COVID-19 pandemic. It's probably more than that. That's from a couple years old. And by the way, that was right out of the Washington Post and the New York Times, and they couldn't account for the money. Now, when you're talking about how much went for the bribe, and I call it a bribe because if 186 billion dollars, billion with a B, and Maggie and I have published that, and we've sourced that, and we've site checked that, and we've published that in many different articles. 186 billion just in one program went to coerce over 420,000 hospitals and physician groups and patient care groups. Let that number sink in. $186 billion to 420,000 hospital systems, physician groups, healthcare corporations. This is, and by the way, the first of which was, as you know, Dr. Mary Talley Bowden's hospital in Houston, which was Houston Methodist, right? And the next one, and so they targeted conservative areas, in Texas. They targeted, made a big deal. You have to force your employees, you have to force, and if they don't, fire them. They have to have the shots. This is what they did. And after Houston Methodist fell, shortly after that, the rest of the hospitals fell. My own hospital, SSM Health, and by the way, go to my X account, anybody watching this, because I still have that. It's been almost 2 years now. It'll be 2 years on June 29th, 2023, that I was fired from SSM Health because I had testified in the United States Senate at the Ron Johnson Roundtable, and I was all over high profile media platforms, like yours and Tucker Carlson's and many others.
I like to
And
think I'm on the same level as Tucker Carlson, but
yeah, I think you do better journalism than he does in the medical field. Um, but when I published all these papers, and again, I published a lot in the last 5 years, I would give them to my chain of command. Listen, I'm a military. I'm a disabled veteran. I served in the United States Air Force. I know chain of command. So everything I published, I ran up the chain of command. At SSM Health, who is now affiliated, as you know, with St. Louis University, not once not once did they say, "Hey, Dr. Thorp, how about doing a grand rounds?" We have a huge academic community here in St. Louis. Why don't you do a grand rounds? Because 4 years ago, I invited anybody in the world to debate me. Anybody. My only ground rules were that it had to be public and it had to be recorded.
Mhm.
Nobody in my societies, nobody at the American board, nobody at the American college, nobody at the Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine, nobody at SSM would engage me. And it's like, at least let me present my case. Nothing. Taboo, dead silence, ignored. And then they took SSM Health, and this is on my pinned tweet for going on, what's it going to be, 2 years? My pinned tweet is what SSM did and exactly documenting that they took $307 million and they did it cheatingly, lyingly, subvertly. They did it under the table. Nobody knows about it. They signed, probably an NDA that they weren't allowed to talk about it, but they took 307 million, and we publish that. You can prove it. Anybody watching this can pull up you can go to America Out Loud platform and look Maggie Thorpe and Jim Thorpe and look at our articles. And the one in December of 2023, we published that. You can look up your own hospital. Every hospital took the money. And part and parcel with that money that they took was a cooperative care agreement. You will follow all of the narratives. And if you deviate from them, you're going to have to pay the money back. If you don't deviate from them, the money is yours to keep.
Wow. I absolutely knew based on my practice that the mandates were coming from the administrative office, not from the medical director office. Because at every hospital I was at, I had taken care of more COVID patients than anybody, just because of the unique situation I was in. And never once was I invited to participate in the discussions about what is the best practice. Not one time, just like you. Not one time did they include you in any of this. Same thing. So, and talk to us about your book. You are so lit up. You have this book that is out, Sacrifice: How the Deadliest Vaccine in History Targeted the Most Vulnerable.
Yeah, and thank you. Um, the first thing I'd like to say about the book is that I'm not the sole author. It was my inspiration, and it was something that I felt that my Lord and Savior uh, was kind of had to slap me upside the back of the head because I swore I would never do it, and that's a lesson of itself. Don't ever say you're not going to do anything because God will come around and prove you wrong. Anyways, I relented and said, okay, I'll write the book. And boy, it was 2 or 3 years of arduous work, an incredible amount of research. But I was fortunate to recruit Celia Farber. Celia Farber is not a doctor, not in the healthcare world, but let me tell you something. She's a much more famous journalist than I ever will be. Celia Farber, who by the way is decades my junior. I know women don't like to talk about age, but she's much younger than I am, by at least a decade and a half, or maybe 2 decades. I turned 72 years old on Wednesday.
Oh,
So,
happy birthday.
thank you. So, she broke the Fauci scam in AIDS, HIV. She was the first investigative journalist to blast that out. If I'm not correct, it was either in Rolling Stone or maybe it was in Harper. It was a massive article where she disclosed everything, and she's been voraciously attacked by the powers that be, by the deep state, by the medical industrial complex since then. So getting her as a co-author was just awesome. And then I did, basically we collaborated. We wrote it together, and it took a long time. And I've spent 20 or $30,000 just of my own money, um, preparing for it, paying for the website for the book and all the other, IT stuff. It was published by Skyhorse, and interestingly, it was published on February 18th, which is a notable day. A lot of nuances there, which I won't go into. And but I'll tell you what, the thing that I'm most proud of, I'm working a couple of jobs right now, and I'm working down in your neck of the woods. I won't mention where in Missouri, but in Southwest Missouri, I love the community down there. I love the people, and I've done 2 book shows at the request of the Barnes and Nobles down there that have just the people are just opening up their eyes. But my other employee is the wellness company. And I said to the wellness company that, my heart is for the victims. My heart is for the 30 million Americans who have family members killed or injured. And this is, unfortunately, I'm an empath, and this has really, really caused a lot of pain and a lot of emotional distress watching these people, like the Martin family, so many of them that too, and you've met and you've prayed with and cried with and grieved with. So I said, I'm going to I'm not going to recoup any of the large amount of money I spent on this book from profits, and I'm all of the profits I want to donate. And I propose that we at the wellness company start a fund that is solely for the purpose of compensating those COVID-19 vaccine victims. And I challenged the Foster Colson, the founder and the CEO, Peter Gillily, and they were so excited. So we have a fund, and we it's already funded. We've already got a large amount of money in there. Maggie and I made a very large donation, and they matched it. We've already made our first grant,
Oh,
and
wonderful.
our first grant went to a family who I just love, and I know Peter Gillily loves too, because this family is the Martin family. Alan and Taylor Martin, you know them, right, Molly?
I don't know if I do.
Oh, okay. Well, for the audience, go to Shot Dead, the movie, and all you simply do is shotdead.org, one word, and watch the movie. In that movie, there are three vaccine victims: um, Ernesto Ramirez's son, the White's baby that was killed by the vaccine, Ernesto Ramirez, and then Mr. and Mrs. Martin, who are from Tulsa, Oklahoma. Also, I was featured in that film with Dr. Peter McCullough. Well, their beautiful daughter, Trista Martin, was killed by the Pfizer vaccine, and they became so in debt with all the circumstances surrounding her death. This girl is she's a spitting image for my oldest daughter at her age, a beautiful daughter of our Most High God. And, you can go and look at pictures. They're posted all over my X account and everywhere else. But they incurred a massive amount of debt. So the Wellness Initiative, which is the name of our fund, it's a 501(c)(3). Anybody can donate to it. We took care of all of their debt, which is a massive amount of debt, wiped it clean. They couldn't even afford a headstone for their daughter. But in that movie, watch that movie because it's a testimony. It's powerful. It was put on by Taryn Gregson, produced that movie through We the Patriots USA.org. And Taryn Gregson, you may remember, is the famous ESPN sportscaster for the golf, ESPN golf announcer, professional golf, PGA, right? And she was pregnant in 2021, and they tried to force her to take the vaccine when she was pregnant. She refused. They fired her. So she started that group, and she lives around your neck of the woods too.
I think she's from the St. Louis area. Yeah.
Not far. I visited her family last year, and they live very close to you. But I'll tell you what, there's a lot of, I've been in a couple of different um, movie documentaries. This is a very high quality one. Maggie and I we flew out to the film festival at Santa Monica where it was featured. It's been featured in half a dozen film festivals around the country. It's won a few awards. And So it's a very well done movie, but it doesn't. you're an empath too, and I know that you have a lot of you lie. Of course, surgeons in don't generally don't. It's not healthy for a doctor to have an empath score of 10 on a 0 to 10 scale. It's not healthy.
It's
But
really not.
unfortunately, that's where I am. Most surgeons don't fall at a 10, but you're not too far from that. But it's not healthy because you don't sleep, you do a lot of grieving and a lot of crying, and you have a lot of emotional pain from the devastation, the killing and destruction that I've seen in the last 5 years.
Yeah. For people who maybe aren't following you yet, where can they follow you, find you, keep track of your story and what you're doing?
I have a website that it's in beta. It should be opened up. It's doctor is in drjathorp.com,
Mhm.
drjathorp.com. And then on X, it's JATHORPMFM at and MFM. It's an acronym for my subspecialty, maternal fetal medicine. So X at JATHORPMFM, no E on the Thorp.
Yeah. So, as we close out today, I want to share people a story. When I first got fired, you were one of the first people to call me, and I remember that conversation because you said, "We'll be there. If you go before the boards, we'll be there. If we need to have a press conference, we'll come and help you." And you were one of the first people who did that.
When was that?
That was in October of 21.
Yeah, I remember. I remember you very well long before we met.
Uh-huh.
I remember you, and I remember McCullough, and I remember Corey, and you all were very crucial in in empowering me and the the knowledge that I had and the anger of what they were doing. You really empowered me.
Yeah, it meant a lot to me because at that time, I didn't know if I was gonna lose my medical license or get arrested or I had no idea. So that really meant a lot. You have a good heart and you really take care of people and are impassioned. So thank you and continue the fight. Any last words? How do we set medicine right so this never happens again? Because if people realize the Grand Canyon from where we should be to what happened, they would be so infuriated. So, how do we prevent this from never happening?
Well, that's a great question because it's been happening since the advent of humanity. There's nothing new under the sun. What has been done will be done again. And this, we have to get our government under control. We have to. I think that President Trump is doing a good job of exposing the corruption, but unless people are held accountable, it will happen again. And I look at Marty Macri. I mean, he's such a disappointment to me. Because he, of all people, heading the FDA, comes from the most corrupted institution in the United States of America. It's controlled. He comes from what? Baltimore, Maryland, Johns Hopkins, who received more funding to push the COVID-19 narratives than any other university in the country. They got $1.3 billion. So here we got Marty Macri, who was pushing the vaccines early in the pandemic. Now heading the FDA. Well, that's not a really good sign. I don't. I just I keep the faith. God's still sitting on the throne. Um, you be you. Don't change. Get up every day. Fight the battle. Occupy until the good Lord comes back. That's what you're charged to do, Molly. And that's what I'm charged to do. No matter what happens, God is still sitting on the throne. And every one of these corrupt bastards will end up kneeling to the truth, which is Jesus Christ, and which is exactly medical freedom and what we're preaching and we've been talking about for the last 5 years. Every soul, past, present, and future, will end up, every person that's pushed this vaccine will kneel before the truth and see the truth. It's only a matter of time. So just keep fighting the good fight and do not become despondent. We'll continue to be attacked. In many ways, they're coming down harder. They're not relenting. I don't know if we'll see victory in our lifetime. If history serves as a teacher, it was 30 years after Dr. Semmelweis was tortured and maybe killed, imprisoned in an insane asylum. It was 30 years after the doctors who were pushing cigarettes as safe and until they were in the grave that cigarettes were acknowledged. Same thing with DES, same thing with thalidomide. Um, you know, so I'm not real hopeful that in my lifetime that we're going to be acknowledged as being on the right side of history, but it's irrelevant. We know we are. Keep fighting.
I love that. Dr. James Thorp, thank you so much for being with us today. We'll hope to have you back and keep us updated as things evolve. And thank you for tuning in to the Dr. Mollie James Show. Tune in next time for the next guest.